Hi, thank you, Yasmina. Thanks to everyone who dialed in today. I hear there's a lot of folks from Germany out there, so guten Abend. I think it's afternoon there. So today's topic is going to be Node Express and Google Maps, as Yasmina introduced me. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about me. As Yasmina said, I'm a software engineer at PopArt. We're a small Portland-based marketing agency, and we handle anywhere from small regional clients to big multinational clients. We actually do a lot of work for Daimler trucks, so that should be of interest to all the people calling in from Germany. I did my undergraduate work at Virginia Commonwealth University. I got degrees in math and computer science. And my first book is being published with O'Reilly, should be coming out in the next couple of months, Web Development with Node and Express, which I'll be referring to as WDNE for brevity. There is my Twitter handle, the blog I post to most often, and my email address if you have any questions for me. All right, so the sample application we're going to be building today, I call Parkfindr. I'm kind of capitalizing on that trend of removing vowels from the end of a word. And this was inspired by the fact that the city of Portland, where I live, has just made a lot of public data available through a REST API. And it just kind of dovetailed nicely with the Google Maps integration because, we can get information about public parks in Portland and display them on a map. So that works out really well. So we're going to be building a really simple little app that gets the park data from the City of Portland API. It's going to put them on a map. And then if you click on a marker, it'll display more info about the park you clicked on. It's really simple, but it would provide like a good starting point for something actually useful. Okay, so let's get started. Today we're going to be using a service called Codio, and I discovered Codio recently, and I'm really in love with it. It's just a fantastic service. Basically, it provides a Linux box for every project, and all through the browser. So it's a really easy, low-commitment way to play around with Node and Express. It's free. For public projects, you can have up to one private project, and then you can have more private projects with a paid account. Most importantly to me, it has web-based terminal access. I'm an old Unix ham, so being able to access terminal is really important to me. So I'm going to switch over to a screencast, and we'll get started with Codio. So give me just 1 second to get that set up. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. I'm going to move my presentation window out of the way. Okay. Go ahead.
We can see it, Ethan.
Okay, great. Okay, so this is Codio. I'm going to resize this window for you guys. It's not going to display very well in the short window. So I'll go ahead and sign myself out here. So if you're new to Codio, you just sign up, and if you sign up, you can use your GitHub or Bitbucket accounts, or you can create an account without those things. I just use my GitHub account. So I'm going to go ahead and sign back in. Okay, and we're going to be starting a new project today. We will actually be using HTML5 Boilerplate to create our initial HTML scaffolding, but I want to customize that. So I would either use an empty project. Normally I start with an empty project. Today I'm actually going to start with a Git repo. It's empty right now, but it's a really easy way to get set up. So I created a repository for this webcast, and that will be available for anyone to look at when the webcast is over. So I'm going to create this based on this repository, and I'm going to call this Parkfindr. And I'm going to go ahead and make it public and create project. So I already had a web README ND file there, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'll give you a really brief tour of Codio. It does have a full-featured IDE. So, for example, if you edit a file, you have a file editor there. You can have split panes, rows, and columns, and you can have a terminal. It's actually pretty fully featured. I'm mostly going to be sticking to the terminal today, but the IDE is there if you want it. And over here on the left, you have a file tree, which I'm going to go ahead and close for now, just so we have a little more screen real estate. Okay. All right. Before we get started with NPM, I'm going to run a poll really quickly. I'm just kind of curious to see how many people have either read or started to read WDNE, Web Development with Node and Express, my book. It's available for early release, so some of you may have already started to read that. I'm just going to kind of get a overview of how many people have read it, so we'll kind of establish what we all know already. Yasmin, is that coming through?
It is.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so about 12% of you have read it. For the other 87% of you, go read my book already. I hope by the end of this webcast you will be inspired to do so. Okay, so that's good. That gives me a little idea about where we're all at. So we're going to start with NPM, and NPM is, let me get the slide up there for you. NPM is the Node Package Manager, and NPM in it is just a convenience command that creates a file called package.json, and that file basically just tracks the dependencies that your project relies on and any metadata about your project. The packages we'll be using today are Express version 4, Express 3 handlebars, and don't let the name scare you. Express 3 handlebars works fine with Express 4. The name is unfortunate, but that's what it is. And then Morgan is a logger. It was recently renamed from Logger to Morgan after Detective Morgan of Dexter fame. So let's see that in action. So we're going to switch back over to our screencast. And I'm going to start with terminal. And you'll see we have a regular Unix terminal here. Hopefully you guys can see that. You can see this is running an instance of Ubuntu SMP. All right, so we're going to do npm init. And npm init will just walk you through some questions. So we'll name our project. We'll leave the default version of 000. I'm going to omit a description for now. I am going to change the entry point. I like to name my project entry point after the project, so I'm going to call that parkfindr.js. I'm going to omit a test command for now. We don't really have time to go through a test plan. And then it already knows about the repository because I set Codio up that way. And I'm going to omit keywords. Go ahead and enter myself as an author. And for the license, I'm going to go with GPL. And it gives me a preview of the package.json. I'm going to say yes. And if I look, I see there's my package.json file, and GitHub had already created a license and a README file there, so that's why those are there. Okay, so now that we've got our package.json file, we can actually start installing Node modules. So all we have to do for that is say npm install, and if you want to actually save the dependency to your package.json file, you have to use the save parameter. And we can put them all on the command line. So I'm going to put Express 3 handlebars, and Morgan. And so npm is downloading these packages and updating the package.json. So now if I look at package.json, I can see that those 3 dependencies are now listed. And by default, it takes the most current version number. And you can play around with this and use different versions. It does a pretty good job of picking good default versions. So unless you have a specific need to change your versions, I recommend leaving it the way it is. Now, just a quick note about this. We'll notice now that the packages are installed in a directory called node modules, and we can even just delete that directory altogether if we want. And that's okay. All we have to do is run npm install again, and it'll recreate that directory because the dependencies are stored in package.json. And that's one reason why you don't normally check in the node.modules package to Git. As a matter of fact, let's make sure it's in our git ignore file. It is. So node modules will be ignored by Git. We don't want that in our version control. Okay. Okay, so we'll be using HTML5 Boilerplate to kind of provide our scaffolding for our project. And we're going to use a Unix command called curl to get it. We'll be using Bootstrap. I'm taking Google Analytics out because until you actually set up Google Analytics, to me that's just noise in the project, so I don't want it. And then I'm going to add a robots task because obviously I don't want this to be spidered by search engines. So let's see how that all works. So HTML5 Boilerplate is at initializer.com with a ZR. And I'm going to choose Bootstrap. And I'm going to add robots.txt and remove Google Analytics. And then instead of clicking download, which will download it to my current browser, I am going to right-click on this and copy link address. And then switch back over to Codio, and now I'm going to use curl. So I'm going to say curl initializer.zip. That's just telling it what file I want to put it in. And now I'm going to paste that URL in. Curl will do its thing. And now if I look, I have initializer.zip. So I can just unzip that guy. There's all my files. I actually want it to be in a directory called public, so I'm going to move initializer to public. And then I'm going to delete the zip file. Okay, so now I've got my public directory with CSS, JavaScript, all the dependencies I need. Okay, now we're going to set up a layout. If you've been working in the web world in the last 10 years, you're probably familiar with the concept of a layout. It's basically just a way, every page on your website has a bunch of common elements like the header, the footer, the navigation, things like that, and you want to be able to edit those in one place instead of having it duplicated for every page. So that's really the concept of the layout. It's kind of called different things in different languages. Sometimes they're called templates. Sometimes it's layouts. In the Express world, we call them layouts. The view engine we'll be using today is called Handlebars, which is based off of Mustache, which is another very popular view engine. You'll see how that works. In the index.html file, which we're going to use for our layout, there are 7 external resources, JavaScript, CSS. Those are all included with relative paths. So you can just open the file in a browser and it will resolve, but we want to use absolute paths because we're actually creating a server. So we're going to change those 7 resources. We're going to remove any HTML that we don't need or want. And then we're going to add a body in triple curly brackets, and we'll talk about why we use triple curly brackets here in a second. Okay, so I'm going to switch back over. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to move our index.html file, and we need to make a directory first. So we're going to make a directory views, and inside views we're going to make a directory called layouts. And then we're going to move our index.html file into views, layouts, and we're going to rename it main.handlebars. You can call it whatever you want, but I usually name the main layout file main.handlebars. You do have to call it .handlebars if you want to use .handlebars. That can be configured, but in my mind it's more trouble than it's worth. Okay, so let's edit that. Before I do that, I'm going to set up some VI settings I like real quick, which will serve us for the rest of presentation. And now let's edit that new layout file. Use layout main. Okay, so here's our HTML5 boilerplate scaffolding. So I say we're going to replace 6 or 7 absolute references. So there's 1, the bootstrap. We're going to do it here, 2, 3, 4, down to bottom. The reason I count these is because I always forget them if I don't. 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so that catches all of the dependencies. Now, the other thing I'm going to do for the purpose of this demo is I'm going to move jQuery up to the head. Now, people always complain when I do this. They say, oh, that's not efficient. It's going to lead to poor rendering times. And that's all true, but for the purpose of this demo, it's going to be fine. There are definitely ways to get around this, but for this demo, I don't want to be worrying about whether jQuery has been linked in or not, so I'm just going to put that right up here in the head. Okay, so let's change the footer, and then let's remove some of this HTML that we don't need. Here's some navigation. I'm going to change the project name. And then there's some login code that I don't want, so I'm going to remove that. This is Jumbotron, which is basically a big header. I don't want that. I'm going to remove that. And here's the body of our file. And HTML5 Boilerplate has provided some, well, boilerplate for you. But we don't want that. We're going to push that into the views. I'm going to delete all of that. And instead, I'm going to replace it with body. And that's what Express and Express and handlebars will use to replace with the content of the views. So I'm going to talk really quickly about that. So if you're not familiar with handlebars, it's very much, well, any templating engine, it's very much like a Mad Lib. So you could say, my name is name, you killed my relative, prepare to verb, right? And then when this got rendered, there would be a context, and the context would contain a property called name, and a property called relative, and a property called verb. And then when it's actually rendered to the browser, it would replace these 3 tags with the content. Now, you might be wondering why I use double curly braces here and triple curly braces here. And the answer is if you use double curly braces in handlebars, it will escape any HTML. So if you have a angle bracket in it, for example, it will replace it with percent or $LT semicolon. So it'll actually render a angle bracket instead of interpreting as HTML. Whereas if you use 3 curly brackets, then it will not interpret the HTML and you include HTML. So when we use views, obviously we're going to want to have HTML in our views, and hence that's why we use the triple curly brackets. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this, and now we're pretty much all set up with our layouts. Okay, so now we're going to add some views. This is a really simple app, so we're only going to have 3 views. We're going to have a home page view that's going to have 2 columns. On the left column, we'll display the map, and on the right column, we'll display the details. And then we'll have a custom 404 page and a custom 500 page, which is a practice I recommend, doing for every website, getting that out of the way really quickly. To me, there's nothing less professional than the only thing less professional than having an error on your website is having an ugly error on your website. So I definitely recommend custom 404 or 500 pages. Before I go into this, we're at 22 minutes now. I'm going to run a poll really quickly. I've got a lot of material I could present, and I want to try to focus it a little bit. So I'm going to ask you guys what we want to focus on here. So we have a couple of options. We could focus more on the Express configuration, how we add routes, how we add views, etc. We'll definitely be talking about that either way, but what you pick depends on how fast we go. or we could focus more on using the third-party data feed, that is getting the parks data from the public API. So like I said, both of these are going to be included, but this will just decide which one we focus on a little bit more. So let me see what you guys are settling on here. Okay, it looks like the consensus is most people are more interested in the third-party data feed, so that's what we will focus on. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get our home page, custom 404 500 page set up. I'm just going to copy and paste these since people are more interested in the data feed. And over here. So I'm going to use the built-in IDE because if you paste it VI, it kind of formats a little weird. So in the views, I'm going to create a view for my home page. So I'm going to call that home.handlebars. Okay. And then I'm just going to paste the code that I've already created, and then we'll go through it really quickly. Okay, so here's our actual HTML right here. If you're not familiar with...
I'm sorry, Ethan. Ethan, can we trouble you to reshare your screen? We're still seeing the poll results.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks, Esmina. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that now. So here at the top, we have our actual HTML for the home page. If you're not familiar with Bootstrap, it's a 12-column layout. So here we have a row, and inside the row, we're splitting the screen into equal halves, so a 6-column layout and another 6-column. And I'm actually going to change this to small. Normally, I would use medium, but since this webcast is kind of on a limited screen size, this will read a little bit better if I put small. Okay, so in the first column, I have a div that's going to hold my map. Inside the second column, I have a div that's going to hold the detailed information about the park. And then I'm linking in Google Maps. And I got all of this just from the Google Maps Hello World example. So if you just search for Google Maps API and go to the web and get started with Google Maps API 3, the Hello World example really contains everything you need to get started. There's the code to initialize the map, and there's some CSS to display the map, and then they show you how to link in the actual Google Maps script. So a couple of things to point out here. We are emitting a Google Maps API key, so this will work, but if I wouldn't want to do this in production because if the website got popular, then Google would call me up and says, hey, buddy, we're getting a lot of hits, we're going to have to shut you down. And if I had it, I would need an API key so I could, pay them for the traffic, essentially. Also, there's a required parameter called sensor, and that basically tells Google Maps if you're on a location-aware device. We could do some mobile detection and set this accordingly, whether or not the user was on a mobile browser or not, but we're just going to say false, which is a little easier way to go. All right, now I'm going to run through the jQuery that's going to actually display the maps. Okay, so on document ready, I create a map options object. We're centered here on Portland and zoom level of 13, which is pretty tight, probably 5 or 6 miles on the side. And then I'm going to get the map element from the DOM, and I'm going to initialize the map. And then this code here is actually populating the temp. So you'll notice I'm using an AJAX call to an endpoint that doesn't exist yet. We'll be writing that here shortly. And this gets back some data. I check to make sure it's an array as expected. And then I iterate over for it, and I create a marker for each park. So it's given a position. That's a latitude-longitude pair. And I tell it what map I want to display it on. And I give the pen a title. And then down here I add an event listener, so when a user clicks on a pin. Then it makes another AJAX call to an endpoint that, again, doesn't exist yet. That specifies a specific park ID, and then it displays data in the park info div that we set up on our HTML. So that's how all of that works. Okay, and let's really quickly make the 404 and 500 pages. You can call these whatever you want, but I like just calling them after the numbers. So we'll call this H2 404 not found. Is server error. Okay, so now we have all our views set up, and we should be ready to get started with Express. Okay, so to create Express, we need a main application file, and our application file is going to do the following things. We're going to create the Express app. We're going to set up handlebars as our view engine. We're going to add logging, which will be helpful for the purposes of this presentation to see what's going on. We're going to add some middleware to serve static resources, such as our CSS and our client-side JavaScript, images, etc. We're going to add a handler for the home page or a route, and we're going to add 404 and 500 handlers. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to start the server. Okay, so let's get that rolling. And again, since given the focus of the poll, I'm just going to copy and paste this data. So I'm going to create a file, which will be our main application file. I'm going to call this Parkfindr.js. And I'm just going to paste in what I've already done. Okay, so let's take a real quick tour through this file. So the first thing I do is I bring in Express and HTTP, and then I create a new instance of Express, and then I link in the app, the handlebars engine. The way you do that is a little bit messy in my mind, but I typed this 5 million times and see it's just natural now. You first specify an engine, you give it a name, we're just calling it handlebars, the name can be whatever you want. And then I'm requiring the Express3 handlebars packages, and that returns a function that takes a configuration object, and the only configuration I normally give it is to specify the default layout. So if you don't explicitly specify a layout, it's going to default to the main layout, which is generally what I want. And then once Express, the engine has been registered with Express, we're going to use it. So we can set the view engine and handlebars. So these two have to match. Oops, sorry. Whatever you specify here for the engine has to match the engine that you pick. Okay. The next thing we do is we link in Morgan, which is a logger. It takes a single parameter. Actually, it could take a configuration object or a single parameter. Really all we care about is specifying what kind of logger it is. The dev logger is friendly and colorful, and it'll read a little bit better for this presentation, so I use the dev logger. Normally, I would have a switch here and use the dev logger for dev environment and a production logger for production environment, but that's a discussion for another day. Then we're going to link in Express's static middleware. It's one of the few middlewares that remain in Express now that Express is version 4.0. And with the static middleware, you have to tell it where your static resources are. So we put it in a subdirectory called public. We're using the __ dir name, which is a node built in that refers to the directory name of a currently executing file. Later on, we're going to create a function called getParks. So that's going to go there. Then we create a route for our home page. So there's our home page route, and all we're doing is we're rendering home. There's a lot of convention over configuration in Express. So if you just say render home, Express knows to look for a file called home.handlebars in the view directory. All of that's configurable, but to me there's really very little reason to mess with that. I went ahead and threw in an error path so we could see how the error handler works. All this does, it throws a new error. This is simulating what would happen if something went wrong in your app. Then we're going to add our APIs. So our first API is the one that gets all of the parks, so we can create maps, markers on the Google Maps. And so we just call this API Parks Oregon Portland. We did it this way so that if we wanted to expand this app in the future, we could have API Park/WA/Seattle or whatever, and it would all fit in really neatly with this format. We call get parks, which we're going to write in a second, and that is a callback that gives you a list of parks, and then we just serve that up as straight up JSON. So we'll see all that working here in a second. And then we have a function that returns a partial. So a partial is just a fragment of HTML that doesn't contain the head and the body tags and all that. It's HTML is designed to be inserted into an already existing HTML page, and that's what we'll be using in our AJAX. So we'll get information about the park, and we'll put it in a specific div tag. And you'll notice that we're using a express parameter here. So :ID will populate rec params ID. So if you said /parcel/parkinfo/5, then rec params ID would have the value 5. That's how we can relate those things. So here we're calling get parks, and we're rendering a partial file, which we'll create in a bit. And we're giving it a park, and we have a way of getting a park by its ID. And here we're specifying that we don't want to use a layout, because otherwise this partial file would have all that HTML that we don't normally want. So we're specifically saying, nope, no layout for this guy. Okay, then finally, after all of your routes, you want to use some custom middleware. So app use creates a middleware. So we're creating this middleware, and all it does is it renders our 404 page. So the way this works is, the 404 handler is the last thing you want to add in your list of routes. So if it doesn't match any other routes, it'll fall through to the 404 handler. So that's how that works. And then after that, there's a special format for middleware that takes 4 parameters. It has to have 4 parameters. That's how it knows this is an error handler. The first parameter is the error that got thrown, and we're going to do a console log here, and then we're going to render our 500 page. And then finally, the very last thing we do is we actually start up the app. So we say app listen on port 3000, and then once it gets started, it'll invoke this function, and then we just console log listen on 3000 for neatness. And that's all there is to it, really. So a quick note about this port number. With Codio, if you go to your project index menu here, you'll see that there's a box URL. So if we click on this guy, right now there's nothing running, which is expected. This is the public URL for your project, and you'll see the port number right there. And to me, it's always defaulted to 3000, so I think that's just what they choose. But you should double check and make sure this is 3000, because that port number should match whatever your Express server is listening on. Okay, so I am going to save that. There's one more thing I think we need to do is right now we haven't given the map a height, so it'll just collapse in the HTML and we won't see it. So let's go ahead and add some CSS to handle that. And I'll just say map height, and then I'll just arbitrarily say 400 pixels. That was a lot of work. Okay, so now we should be ready to see our app in action. So I always like to stick clear in front of things so that it's all nice and neat. And then I'm going to say node and Parkfindr, and that's going to start up my app. Okay, so there we are, listening on 3000. Let's take a look and see what happens. There is our application with our map in there. There's nothing on the map. You'll see we have our bootstrap navigation, our little footer here, and our map, and the 2 columns. There's nothing in the right column right now, but you get the idea. And we are indeed zoomed in on Portland. Okay. All right, so we're going to use the next 15 minutes to talk about getting the park data. So we're going to take it one step at a time. We're going to start with a kind of naive implementation, and then we're going to move up to a more sophisticated implementation. So our first take, our very naive implementation, is we're going to use Node's HTTP GET method, and there's going to be callbacks everywhere. And the problems with this approach is that, because we're making the HTTP GET every time a person goes to the page, we now have a dependency on a third-party API, which means we could potentially be abusing the third-party API. If 1,000 people an hour are looking at this site, then that's going to be passed on to the city of Portland, and they're going to be like, hey, why is your app using all these API calls? Could be a performance issue. We're now dependent on someone else's service for performance, and that doesn't make us feel comfortable. And also, in our first initial take, we're not going to have any data transformation, so we're not actually, modifying the public data to fit our needs. So, it kind of begs the question, why are we even doing this? We could just, from the front end jQuery, we could access the API directly, and, that's certainly true, but we'll be addressing that later on. So let's get started with this quote-unquote naive implementation. So I'm going to stop my server. And here we have our little comment. We're going to do get parsings here. So let's go ahead and create that. And again, for the interest of time, I'm going to cut and paste what we've already got. Switch out of the real quick. Okay, so here is the, actually I haven't made this as a function, so let's make it a function. Function get parks, and that takes a callback. That's how we're using it. So that's this whole thing in a function. Okay, so you can see we're using Node's built-in HTTP GET method, which does exactly what it says. It makes an HTTP GET request of the URL you provide. This is the URL we're providing. So let's take a look at that data. I've already got it up here, but we'll just load it again to prove that it's what it says it is. And so here's the Portland Public Parks data. It's clearly a JSON feed. Status okay, and then the list of results, and here are all the parks with latitude and longitude, and some amenity data, and the name of the park. Okay. So we call HTTP GET against that URL. That's going to invoke a callback, and the RES, or response object, is going to get its data in chunks. So every time we get a chunk of data, right here, we just add it to the JSON data we're collecting. So we create a variable to store all the chunks, and then we just append each chunk to it. When it's done, when we've received all the data, the end event will occur, and then now we can take that JSON and process it. So we're actually, I may have, okay, so I've given you the non-naive implementation. Let's just go ahead and delete this and do this naively here. Stick with the program. Make this a lot shorter. Okay, so when we're done, all we have to do is invoke our callback with the parks we've received. So we'll just say JSON parse. We're going to so this JSON variable is actually a string, so we need to parse it to make it an object. So we parse that guy, and then we just return it, and that's all there is to it. So we're just essentially taking the data from this URL, and we're spitting it right back to the caller. So let's take a look and see how that works. So we will look at it. So we called it API, parks, or then Portland. And we've done something wrong. Parse is not defined. JSON. Oh, I put the wrong variable in there. Let's try this again. And you can see now we're actually getting the exact same data that we get directly from the Portland API, which is not really useful. If this is all we needed to do, we would just have called the Portland Parse API directly from our jQuery and called it a day. So this is not particularly useful thus far, but it provides kind of a building block for where we're going next. And I'll also point out that this, because we haven't gone to the next step, this won't actually work in our application. We don't see any markers, and we noticed that this did not return an array as expected. It actually returned an object that contained the results array, which is not really what we wanted. So right now everything's broken, so let's fix it. Stop our server, fire Parkfindr.js, and give me just 1 second here. So apparently I didn't save the kind of intermediate steps. We're just going to recreate it real quick. I think we've got time to do that. Okay, so we're going to parse our JSON again. We're going to check to see if the status is okay. We're going to throw an error if we didn't. We're going to ignore parse by ID for now. And we're just going to invoke our callback with this. We've got our callback. I'm going to say CB. And we know that within that callback data, there's a property called results, which is an array. And that's what we're going to return. Don't worry about this stuff. Go ahead and add our error handling there. We don't have a cache yet, so we'll just call it, we'll just say error fetching parks. As you can see, a cache is where we're going next. But for now, we're going to start with data transformation. So now we're transforming the data into something a little more useful for us. We're using JavaScript's built-in map function, which for every park is going to transform it. So whatever gets returned here is going to, we're going to transform every park in the results list to whatever we return. And what we return is our own custom object. And so we're doing a couple of things here. First, we're kind of filtering the data. We're taking only what we need. You'll notice there are things like the number of acres in this park, which we don't really care about, and the year it was required, which we don't care about. We could add those at a later date if we wanted to, but for now, we're going to stick with the principle that less is more, and we're going to take only what we need. So we're going to grab the park ID, the name of the park, and again, the other thing we're going to do is we're going to transform this data because we don't like the name property. That doesn't make sense to us. So we're going to call this name. Amenities is fine. We'll stick with that name. And the other transformation we make is they call their longitude LOM, and we prefer LNG. That actually fits in better with the Google Maps API. So we're transforming the names of those fields as well. I'm going to get rid of this because that will come later. And then we're going to return the park, so that will transform this. So now we should get results that look a little more like what we're aiming for. So let me go ahead and save that. Let's start this server and take a look at our API. And it looks like we've done something wrong. JSON's not defined. Yeah, we call that. We got rid of some stuff we needed, so let's get that back here. we still have to create our JSON variable, and we still have to listen for the data event, add to the JSON, and then once we've received all the data, then we can transform our data. Okay, so let's give that another shot. Missed something. Line 36. There's our catch. There's our end. Looks like we need a gets or get. Okay, so we just missed the parentheses and a curly bracket. Okay, so now we have some data that looks a little bit more like what we're aiming for. It starts off as just an array, which is what we wanted, and then the array contains objects, each of which represents a park, and it contains a subset of this data here. So you see we have the park name. There's some white space in here, so I'm going to trim that. We have a list of amenities, and we have the location, and the location is named LNG as we want. So let me add that trim real quick. I don't know why, but little details like that drive me crazy. So now we've trimmed all the white space off these park names. So now we should actually see the map working if we've done it all right. And there we go. There are all our parks. You'll notice there are a lot of parks in Portland. Very, very green city. Okay, so obviously clicking on a park doesn't work. We should get no console error, but I bet we've got an error on the back end. Yeah, so we haven't added that information yet, but there are all our parks. And I want to try to finish up within the next couple of minutes so we can turn it over to Q&A. So let me just run through the next and final step really quickly. Okay, so now we're going to move to our final implementation. And we've definitely improved things, and we've transformed our data, which is great, but we're still dependent on that third-party service. Every time you load the page, it makes a request of the API, and if the API goes down or is slow, then our app is going to go down. We don't want that. So we're going to cache that data, and then we have control over it. So let's look at our application here. And again, I've got this all saved. This is the final implementation. There's a lot going on here. So the first thing I want to point out is that I'm using a immediately invoked function expression, aka an IIFE. So you'll notice it starts here and ends down here. So I'm creating an IIFE and I'm invoking it. So get parks is actually going to be the result of whatever is invoked inside this function. So what happens inside this function where we return a function? So get parks is actually going to be a function. So it can be the function we're looking for, a function that takes a callback. So why did I do that? Well, the reason I did that is because I wanted to put this cache inside this closure. So now cache, it's variable cache, not cluttering up my global namespace. It's contained in parks. It can't be contaminated or modified by anything else. This cache is specifically for the parks cache. That's what I want. So that's why I encapsulated it. It's not the only way to encapsulate things, but it's a really quick and handy and convenient way to encapsulate data. So I have a variable to store when the cache was last refreshed. I specify the refresh interval. I want to refresh every 24 hours. I'm assuming park data doesn't change that often. And then I have an array of parks contained within the cache. So within the function, I get the date. And if the date is greater than the last time it was refreshed, plus 24 hours, then I'm going to go ahead and refresh the cache. I tell a little fib here. I immediately set cache refresh to now, even though I'm about to do it. That's going to prevent, if 5 people hit the page at the same time, it'll prevent the cache from being refreshed 5 times. Then I'm going to do the HTTP GET call that I'm so familiar with now. I'm going to collect all my data, all the chunks of data. On end, now things get a little more interesting. So I parse the data, I check that it's okay, throw an error otherwise. I create an object called parks by ID because I want to be able to map parks to their individual IDs. And then I create the array of parks, just as we did before. And you'll notice here that I'm initializing the object that contains parks by ID. And then I'm adding that as a property to the array. So now I have a way to just list all of the parks, or a way to get a park by its individual ID. And then when I'm done with all this, I call the callback, and instead of calling it with the data that gets returned from the API, I call the callback with the data from the cache. And so the first time, when the server starts up, the first time you access this, it'll get the data from the API, and every time after that, it'll get it from the cache until 24 hours later, and at which point it will refresh that data. Okay, so let's see this in action. We're running out of time here, so I'm going to really quickly add the partials, make their views partials, and call that park info. Partials, new file, park info.handlebars. Don't really have time to get through this. We'll maybe talk about it in the QA. I'll go ahead and run our Parkfindr. And let's cross our fingers and hope this works. Okay, so it takes a second, but it loads up. And now if we click on one of these guys, we get information about our parks. Okay, so quick thing to note. So you'll see here I did a console log, so it updated the park cache. Now I'm going to refresh this page. And you'll notice it's a lot quicker. Those parks come up really quickly, and that's because it did not have to do this again. The cache is already there. The data is cached, and it just spits it right back, and we have our parks ready to display. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure there was some time for Q&A. Oh, I got some more slides. Let's go through this real quickly. Here's some slides about what we did with the parks. I kind of talked all through that, so I'm going to whip through those. We show the parks on the map using our cached API. Show the parks detailed. All that's done. Okay, so where would we go next? We might want to add clustering to our app, so if there is an error with our app, we can start it up again really quickly. If we do move to clustering, we'll probably want to cache our parks in a database instead of in memory. And then I thought a neat feature would be to use Google's custom search API to get a park image. So when you click on a park, it'll have a little picture of the park. That would be a fun little project. And then, of course, we could add a Parks Near Me feature for mobile, so someone could just click on it and see there's a park right down the block from them. Okay, so in conclusion, you should get comfortable with callbacks. Callbacks are, part and parcel in the Node world. You'll use them all the time. It's definitely a slightly different way of thinking, but it's something that once you get used to, you'll find it's extremely powerful and flexible. Cache is key. Cache is great. You cache data. It'll make your website faster. You'll reduce external dependencies. I highly recommend it. And then finally, closures are awesome. You saw how we took that get parks function and we took the cache and we bundled it up nice and neat inside that closure. So that's a great little feature. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up